The first thing I saw when I opened my apartment door was my roommate standing in the middle of the living room with tears running down her face, holding a cardboard box filled with things that had belonged to me. The second thing I noticed was that my bedroom door was wide open, even though I knew I had locked it before leaving for deployment. Then she looked directly at me, went completely still, and whispered, "You weren't supposed to see this." I had come home 3 weeks earlier than anyone expected, carrying a duffel bag over one shoulder and a small wooden box containing the last photographs my mother had sent me before she passed away. I had imagined surprising my roommate, Marlo Bennett, with a laugh, a hug, and the kind of ordinary afternoon I had dreamed about during months away from home. Instead, I stood frozen in the doorway, wondering what had happened inside the place I still thought of as home. If you believe in kindness, forgiveness, hope, and second chances, please take a moment to like this story, share it with someone who needs a little hope today, leave a meaningful comment, and subscribe to our channel so our community can keep sharing stories that remind us there is still goodness in people. My name is Everett Calloway, and before that afternoon, I believed I understood Marlo better than anyone else did. We had met 3 years earlier when we were both trying to survive the strange transition from college life into adulthood. She worked at a small rehabilitation clinic during the day, taking care of patients who had suffered injuries and helping them relearn ordinary things most people never thought twice about. I worked long hours, trained whenever I could, and eventually received orders for deployment. Marlo was the person who helped me pack. She labeled the small compartments in my travel bag, bought extra batteries for my watch, and insisted that I take a photograph of our apartment with me because she knew how much I hated the idea of returning to an empty place after months away. We had never been romantically involved, and neither of us had ever wanted that kind of relationship. What we had was quieter and, in many ways, more valuable. We were family by choice. During my deployment, Marlo and I exchanged messages whenever circumstances allowed. She told me about broken appliances, grocery prices, her patients, and the little plant she had somehow managed to keep alive on the kitchen windowsill. I told her about the places I could safely describe, the people I served alongside, and the strange feeling of measuring time by letters, calendar pages, and the number of mornings until home. I never told her everything I was carrying emotionally. There were things I didn't know how to explain, even to myself. When I finally received notice that I would be returning earlier than expected, I decided not to tell anyone. I wanted one completely normal surprise. I imagined walking through the door while Marlo was making coffee, dropping my bag on the floor, and watching her scream with happiness. I had no idea that the biggest surprise waiting for me would not be my early return. It would be discovering what she had been doing while I was gone. The cardboard box in her hands contained my old photographs, several books, letters from my mother, and the small collection of medals and keepsakes I had stored in my bedroom closet. Seeing those things outside my room made something inside me tighten. My first thought was that someone had broken in. My second was that Marlo had somehow betrayed me. I looked past her and noticed that half of my bedroom furniture had been moved. My desk was almost empty, and the closet doors were open. She didn't try to stop me when I walked toward it. She simply stood there with her hands trembling around the box, looking like someone who had been caught doing something unforgivable. I opened the closet and found empty shelves where my clothes had been. Panic rose through me before I could control it. I had spent months overseas trusting Marlo with everything I owned, including things I could never replace. I turned toward her, ready to demand an explanation, but then I noticed something strange. The apartment didn't look ransacked. It looked organized. Every missing item had been carefully packed. My books were stacked by size. My photographs had been placed between sheets of protective paper. Even the medals had been wrapped in soft cloth. Nothing looked stolen. Everything looked deliberately moved. That was when Marlo finally admitted that she had been clearing out my room, but not for the reason I thought. She had discovered several months earlier that the building's landlord intended to renovate the entire property and raise the rent beyond what either of us could afford. She had been trying to find another apartment for us, but the process had become complicated because she had also been dealing with something she had kept secret from me. Her father, a man she had spent years trying to distance herself from, had fallen seriously ill. He had no one else nearby, and although their relationship had been painful for years, Marlo couldn't bring herself to abandon him. I still didn't understand why my belongings were packed into boxes. Then she took me into my bedroom and showed me what had been hidden behind the furniture. There were stacks of medical bills, receipts, handwritten notes, and rental applications. She had been selling some of her own belongings to help pay for her father's care. She had also taken extra shifts at the clinic. But the most painful discovery was a folder containing a lease application for a small house several miles away. My name was on it as a future tenant. She had been planning to move us without telling me. At first, I was angry. I told myself it was because she had invaded my privacy, but underneath that anger was something more complicated. I felt guilty. I had been thousands of miles away thinking about everything I would do when I returned, while Marlo had been quietly carrying problems that belonged to both of us. I had believed I was protecting her by not telling her how difficult deployment had been for me. She had apparently believed she was protecting me by hiding how difficult life at home had become. Then I saw the box again. Inside it was a photograph of my mother standing beside me when I was younger. On the back, Marlo had written a date and a note. She had apparently found the photograph after my mother's death and had worried that it would be damaged by the apartment's leaking window. She had kept it safe inside a plastic sleeve. Next to it was one of my mother's old handwritten recipes, carefully folded and protected. I realized that Marlo hadn't been destroying my room. She had been protecting the pieces of my life that she knew mattered most. The hardest part came when she finally told me why she had been crying when I walked in. She had been preparing to leave the apartment that very afternoon. She believed she had failed me. Her father's condition had deteriorated, her finances were collapsing, and she had already decided that she might need to move into a tiny studio near the clinic so she could continue working and helping him. She had packed my belongings because she didn't want me to return and discover that she had disappeared without explaining. I looked around the apartment and suddenly understood why everything felt so strangely empty. She wasn't trying to abandon me. She was trying to make sure I had a place to come home to, even if she couldn't stay in it herself. For months, I had imagined coming home as a celebration. Instead, I found someone I loved as family preparing to sacrifice her own stability because she thought she had no other choice. That realization broke something open inside me. I sat on the floor beside the boxes, and for the first time since returning, I allowed myself to admit how frightened I had been. I told her that deployment had changed me in ways I didn't understand. I told her about mornings when I woke up exhausted, afternoons when ordinary sounds made me tense, and moments when I wondered whether anyone would recognize the person who returned. I had spent so much time convincing everyone that I was fine that I had almost convinced myself. Marlo listened without trying to fix me. That mattered more than anything. We spent the rest of that afternoon going through the boxes together. Every object became a memory. An old coffee mug reminded us of the first terrible apartment we had shared. A broken lamp reminded us of the winter when neither of us could afford a replacement. A photograph of my mother reminded me that grief didn't disappear just because life kept moving. A stack of Marlo's old notebooks reminded her of dreams she had abandoned while taking care of everyone else. Then came the unexpected turning point. Inside one of the boxes, I found an envelope addressed to me in my mother's handwriting. I had never seen it before. Marlo had discovered it months earlier inside an old storage container while searching for something else. She had been afraid to open it, and she hadn't. She had kept it sealed because she knew it belonged to me. My hands shook as I opened it. My mother had written the letter before she died. She wrote about how proud she was of me, but the words that stayed with me were about kindness. She had written that strength wasn't measured by how much pain a person could carry alone. She said that sometimes the bravest thing a person could do was allow someone else to help carry it. I looked at Marlo, and suddenly the entire situation made sense. We had both been trying to be strong in exactly the wrong way. She had tried to protect me by carrying everything alone. I had tried to protect her by hiding my own struggles. We had both confused silence with strength. So we made a decision that afternoon. We would stop pretending we could solve everything separately. Marlo would continue helping her father, but she wouldn't sacrifice her entire future to do it. I would help with the expenses I could manage, not because I felt obligated, but because she was family. We would find a new apartment together instead of letting fear decide where either of us lived. More importantly, we would promise that neither of us would disappear behind a closed door and pretend everything was fine. The months that followed weren't magically easy. Her father's health remained fragile. I had difficult days adjusting to civilian life. There were bills, paperwork, appointments, memories, and moments when both of us wondered whether we had made the right decisions. But something had changed. We began asking for help before reaching the breaking point. We learned that forgiveness wasn't pretending nothing had happened. It was understanding why someone made a choice, acknowledging the hurt it caused, and deciding whether love was strong enough to move forward. Eventually, we moved into the little house Marlo had originally found. The place wasn't luxurious. The kitchen was small, the floors creaked, and the backyard needed work. But sunlight filled the living room every morning, and there was enough space for both of us to breathe. Marlo kept the plant from our old apartment on the kitchen windowsill. I framed my mother's letter and placed it beside it. One afternoon, nearly a year after I had returned early from deployment, I came home from an appointment and found Marlo sitting at the kitchen table surrounded by paperwork. For a second, the sight took me back to that first afternoon, when I had walked through the apartment door and found her frozen with a box in her hands. But this time she wasn't crying. She was smiling. The paperwork was for a new certification she had enrolled in, something she had dreamed about for years but had always postponed because someone else needed her more. She had finally decided that helping other people shouldn't require destroying herself. I told her I was proud of her, and she laughed because she said I had become annoyingly sentimental since coming home. But I knew the truth. I wasn't sentimental. I was grateful. That unexpected afternoon had taught me something I never learned during training, something no deployment briefing could have prepared me for. Sometimes the people we love hurt us while trying to protect us. Sometimes secrets are born from fear rather than cruelty. Sometimes the person standing in front of you with trembling hands isn't your enemy, even when your heart initially tells you they are. And sometimes home isn't the apartment you return to after being away. Home is the person who keeps your memories safe when you aren't there to protect them yourself. If this story touched your heart, please like this video, leave a meaningful comment, share it with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to our channel so you never miss another emotional journey. Before you go, leave a comment telling us this: have you ever forgiven someone after discovering that their mistake came from trying to protect you, or have you ever needed someone to forgive you when your intentions were better than your actions? Your words might be exactly what someone in our community needs to hear today. I still keep that cardboard box in my closet. I never threw it away. Inside are the photographs, the old books, the medals, and my mother's letter. But now there is one more thing inside it, a photograph of Marlo and me standing in front of our new home on the afternoon we moved in. We are both smiling, tired, and imperfect, with boxes scattered around our feet and sunlight pouring through the windows behind us. Whenever I look at that photograph, I remember the afternoon I came home early and thought I had discovered betrayal. What I actually discovered was something much harder and much more beautiful: two broken people trying to protect each other, finally learning that they didn't have to carry everything alone. And sometimes, the greatest second chance isn't being given another opportunity to change the past. It's being brave enough to build something better from what happened.